Now I would like to share with you the secret to self-esteem. How would you like to know the secret to self-esteem? Compare yourself to losers. I'm not kidding. So, I think earlier this semester I told you how to be more attractive, and it was to stand near ugly people. And it's the same idea with the self-esteem. And I'm kind of teasing here about comparing yourself to losers. There's actually a guy that wrote a book about this called Choosing the Right Pond by Robert Frank. And his thing was all about how you view yourself is based on your comparison group. And so if you choose to, whatever group you choose to compare yourself with, that's basically going to determine how happy you are with where you're at in life. One of the things we figured out is that we were letting people into elite institutions based on things other than academic prowess. And you could take someone that was of the same intelligence level and you put them in a place like Missouri State and they thrive and they're happy with themselves. You take that same person and they're decently intelligent, but they're not the brain trust like Harvard. You put them at Harvard and suddenly, what are they? They're the loser, right? And so their outcomes are actually better if they go to a place where people are more similar to them. And so you can look at my CV or my resume and see that I went to the University of Arkansas, Kent State University, and the University of Missouri. Would I have felt better about myself if I'd gone to Purdue for my engineering degree? Probably not, right? Anyway, something to think about. Okay, so last time we talked about changing our credit policy, and we have the different things that are going on in here. First of all, we're extending our credit period. We are increasing our discount. Oh, for shame, he's late. And we are easing our collection effort. So relaxing our credit standards. We're changing our terms from 110 net 30 to 210 net 40. In other words, we're doubling the discount and we are increasing the terms by 10 days for people to pay. So what do we currently have going on here? Well, we've got $400 million in sales, and we've got 50% paying on day 10, 40% paying on day 30, and 10% paying on day 40. So from that information, we can figure out our days sales outstanding. 0.5 times 10 is 5. 0.4 times 30 is 12. And 0.1 times 40 is 4. And I add all that together, and I've got 21 days sales outstanding. What are the other names for days sales outstanding? Very good. Average collection period was another one. Days sales in receivables. Days sales in receivables. Okay, so now I've got that. I can also, I'll be able to figure out how much I have in receivables by figuring out my average days sales. Average days credit sale. How would I figure out the average days credit sale? What's the first assumption that I make? How much of my sales are on credit? Unless you're told otherwise, you always assume all sales are on credit. Unless you hear otherwise, assume all sales are on credit. So I'm going to take that $400 million in sales and divide it by 365, and that's going to give me my average daily credit sales. And I'm going to be able to multiply the day sales outstanding by that to get the accounts receivable. My discounts at current are 1% times that 400 million in annual sales times 0.5. Why 0.5? Because 50% take the discount. 50% pay on day 10, and therefore we can see that we're going to have to spend $2 million every year in discounts. So let's talk about how we're going to come up with our accounts receivable carrying cost. we've already said how we're going to calculate that accounts receivable, but there's something new we're going to throw in here, and that's the variable cost ratio. Now, why would we not be concerned about the fixed cost portion of the costs in our products for purposes of accounts receivable carrying costs?
They're not going to change based on volume.
Yeah, it's not going to change based on on this accounts receivable thing. So in other words, it's not incremental. What's the incremental portion that we're going to be bearing as a result of our decisions? It's going to be the variable portion. And so we're going to take our accounts receivable, multiply by that variable cost ratio, which is just variable cost divided by total cost. And then we're going to multiply that by the cost of money used to carry receivables. Maybe I'm pulling the money from the bank on my line of credit. I'll know what that percentage is, and I can use it here. So we can come up, and we're going to call this ARCC. It's going to be equal to the day sales outstanding times the daily sales. When you put those two together, that gives you the accounts receivable. We're going to multiply that times our VC ratio, multiply it times our cost of funds. They tell us our VC ratio is 0.7. What does that mean? It means 70% of the cost is variable, 30% is fixed. And then we have the cost of funds being 20%. Does that sound high to you? So it depends on what stage the business is in, how risky they are as a borrower when we start looking at those costs of funds. So our accounts receivable carrying cost is going to be equal to 21. That's the number of days outstanding. And we're going to multiply that by 400 million divided by 365. That little piece gives us our average daily credit sales, multiplied by that variable cost ratio of 0.7, multiplied by our cost of funds, which is 0.2. And so when we do all that, we come up with $3.2 million for our accounts receivable carrying costs. What does that mean? It means that every year we are spending over $3 million to finance this accounts receivable that we are using as part of our credit policy. Okay, and we've already discussed why we only include the variable cost portion, because it's the only thing that's incremental here. Currently, 2.5% of our sales go uncollected. If you take 2.5% times 400 million, that gives us $10 million. So we've got $10 million a year of bills that we send out that do not get paid. By the way, do you think 2.5% sounds low or high? I think it would depend on the business that you're in. And it would depend on how long your customers have been around. There's all sorts of things that could go in there. So 2.5% to me sounds like it could be a reasonable number. So our new policy is going to take us from 110 net 30 up to 210 net 40. We're going to have a larger discount, so that amount of money we spend on discount is going to go up. And we're going to have a longer payment period, and so we're going to have more days sales outstanding. And we're going to have a relaxed collection effort, and we're going to lower our standards. So we're going to lower our credit standards, and we're going to loan money out or extend credit to even riskier people, and we're going to spend less time, money, and effort in collecting those debts. Those two things together sound like a recipe for disaster to me. But feel free to go out there and relax your credit standards and keep your collections disciplined, right? So you can stay after these people. But to do both at the same time seems a little beyond the pale. Okay. The company estimates sales will increase $130 million. That's the only reason we're doing this. The only reason we're going through all this is to try to increase our sales. Now, management thinks 60% will now take the discount, with half of the non-discount customers paying on day 40, the other half paying on day 50. I want you to look at that word thinks. Are these numbers known with certainty? No, what are they?
Swag.
They're swags, they're expected values. And where are they getting these numbers? Do you think they've got some scientific? No. I'm betting these are anal extrapolation, right? Where they just pull the numbers out of their ass. Okay. Discounts, the accounts receivable carrying costs, and our bad debt losses are all going to increase as a result. We know the discounts are going to increase because the percentage of people taking the discount is going to go up. It went up from 50% to 60%, and the discount is twice as much. So those are two reasons the discount's going to go up. Our receivables carrying cost is going to go up because we're going to have longer terms out there. We're also going to have more sales. So both of those things will contribute to our AR carrying costs going up. And our bad debt losses are going to go up too, because we are, first of all, we're selling more stuff. Even if the percentage didn't go up, we would still have more bad debt losses. But we are also loaning money or extending credit to riskier customers, and we're not going to go after them as diligently to get our money back. So you've got three reasons there that your bad debt losses are going to go up. But the good news is our collection expenses will go down. Why? Because we're relaxing our collection efforts. Questions so far? Let's see what impact that has. So our new amount of discounts is going to be that 2% times the 530 million, which is our new sales level, times 0.6. Where did the 0.6 come from?
People taking the discount.
Yeah, 60% of people are taking the discount. And so the new amount of discounts is going to be around 6.36 million, which is, we're going to round down to 6 million. What was it previously? Yeah, I think it was around 3, so there's a big jump. Our new days sales outstanding, how are we going to find that? Well, we know 60% are taking the discount, means they pay on day 10, and they tell us that 20% are going to pay on day 40, and 20% are going to pay on day 50. And so we've got 6 plus 8 plus 10 gives us 24 days. Previously, it was 21 days. And so our new accounts receivable carrying cost is that 24 days multiplied by our average days credit sales has now gone up, right? Because we've got 530 million in sales instead of 400 million. And so that's why we're taking 530 million divided by 365. Once again, multiplying by 0.7, which is our variable cost ratio, multiplied by 0.2, which is our cost of funds. And now our new accounts receivable carrying cost is up to 5 million. So that's a big increase there. The company will reduce credit analysis and collection expense by 3 million, but our bad debt is going to rise by 6%, rise to 6%. And so we were at 2.5%, now we're at 6%. 6% of 530 million is around 32 million bucks. How much was it before?
10 million.
Yeah, 10 million. So we're looking at an additional 22 million in bad debt losses. So we're going to put all this together and see what happens to our net income. So we have on the column on the left is under the current policy, and the column on the far right is under the new policy. And then we can do some subtraction there to come up with that middle column. I think they should have actually swapped these last two columns. So we've gone from 400 million in sales up to 530. Let's just look at what the net income was. So we had our discounts that we were giving there, so that brings us down to 398 for our net sales. And we had 280 in production costs, so our profit before our credit costs was 118. We said we were spending $3 million a year on our accounts receivable carrying costs. We're spending $5 million on our credit analysis and collections, and we had $10 million in bad debt losses. So our profit before taxes was 100, and our taxes were 50. What does that mean our tax rate is? Yeah, 50%. Does that sound reasonable? Okay, so it really depends. The corporate tax rate for the federal government has been at times up to like 35%, right? And then if you find yourself in a state like California, it's possible you could get up to something close to 50%. Okay, so that gives us a net income of 50. Now let's look under the new policy. So the sales go up to 530, but our discounts go up to 6, so that gives us our net sales of 524. So far, so good. Why did our production costs go from 280 to 371?
Our sales increased.
Yeah, our sales increased, and I'm pleased all day to spend extra on production costs if I'm getting additional sales out of it. And so our production costs go up to 371, so our profit before credit costs has gone from 118 up to 153. So far, does this look like a good decision? Yeah, so far it does. Now let's talk about our credit-related costs. Our costs of carrying AR have gone up by 2 to 5, but we've dropped $3 million on our credit analysis and collection, so that brings us down to 2. But our bad debt losses have gone from 10 up to 32. And so now when we look after with our profit after taxes, we are up by 14%. However, what did we say about all those numbers over on the right-hand side? What are they?
Guesses.
Yeah, they're guesses, right? And so we're going from 100 to 114. Do you think it's possible that we could actually end up being worse off as a result of doing this? Absolutely, and it all boils down to how accurate were those guesses that our managers made. Okay, taxes once again 50%, so we're down 57. That gives us net income of 57, and so our net income goes up 14% in theory as a result of having made these changes. But once again, you've got to remember that's an expected value. It's not a promise. Questions? In fact, that idea of the sales going from 400 to 530, that's also just another scientific wild-ass guess, right? So all of this stuff, the only thing we know for sure is what's on the left over there. Any questions? Okay, that's the end of credit and credit policy. And now we're on to inventory management. So why in the heck are we talking about inventory in a finance class? Well, it turns out inventory is part of the current assets. Current assets are part of our net working capital. And so we have to manage inventory in the same way we have to manage accounts receivable, in the same way we have to manage our cash. So any kind of talk about working capital management without talking about inventory is incomplete. Now, one of the things that the reading says is that inventory is dynamic. What does dynamic mean?
It's changing.
Yeah, it changes. And it can change based on changes in the demand for our product in the market. It can change based on the season. For example, I was out at the new Walmart robotic warehouse fulfillment deal on South Campbell. And one of the guys said he had asked to include this pumpkin mix in the warehouse. And so this would have been something that they were going to add. And they looked it up. They said, well, we haven't sold any of that for 11 weeks. Why would we start carrying that in the warehouse? Why would you think this time of year people would start carrying? Yeah, it's a seasonal item, right? People, this time of year, especially ladies, get the pumpkin spice thing. It just happens, right? So you've got to have this stuff on hand. Inventory is dynamic. It's going to be changing with the seasons. It's going to be changing with trends. And so if you think you're going to keep the same stuff in inventory forever and be just fine, you're absolutely wrong. We have to think about internal and external factors, and we'll get into what those factors are for for how much inventory we're going to hold. The fact that it's dynamic, can you just look at it once a year? No. And in fact, we used to look at it once a month. But do you think in the oil field, perhaps my inventory needs were not as dynamic as they might be in retail? Oh yeah. Take a look at someone like Zara or Shein or any of those fast fashion people. Can you imagine how dynamic their inventory is? The fashions change day by day. Okay, so here's you a good definition of inventory. It's an idle stock. What does idle mean?
Stationary.
Yeah, it's not doing anything, right? It's just sitting there. It's an idle stock of physical goods. Are we talking about app downloads and crap like that? No, we're talking about physical things that are on a shelf or in a tank with economic value held in various forms by an organization, and we'll talk about the different forms, awaiting packing, processing, transformation, use, or sale at a future point in time. In fact, the only reason that we hold inventory is same as the only reason that we extend credit, and that is to produce sales. If I could produce sales without holding inventory, I would do it. In fact, I had a little business for a while where I was selling 3D printed stuff online. Do you think I had an inventory that I made up and sat on the shelf? I had a little bit, but and once I figured out that there was one item that people really liked, I would make like 10 of them at a time. But for the most part, what was I doing? I was running a no inventory business where I would wait until the order came in to actually manufacture it. Now, did I still have an inventory? I have my raw material, right? I have my raw material, my packaging, that sort of stuff. But we would love to get away from holding inventory. In fact, we view inventory as a necessary evil. Yes, I know I have to carry it, but I want to carry as little as I can to achieve the goals of my business. Okay, so it can be in a complete or incomplete state, and we'll talk about those different things. But you think about what inventory is used for. So it's to facilitate future consumption. So if you're thinking about raw materials, that 3D printing filament that I had on my shelves, that was being held for future consumption and production of the product. Or we could sell the inventory or for further processing or value addition. When you start, and I came out of a machine shop, so I'll use a metal good for my example here. When you start on a part, you've got your raw material cost in it. And then we would take that and we would drill a hole in it. It costs us a certain amount of money to put that hole in it. And so now we've got some value added there. This thing is worth more now than it was before we drilled the hole in it. And then we send it to the lathe for the rough outside diameter. And so that's adding a little more value. As you go through the entire process, we keep adding more and more value until we get to the finished goods stage, where now we have added all the value. And so the value of this thing keeps going up over the course of manufacturing. I remember when I first became a manufacturing supervisor, and the first time one of my guys scrapped a part that was very near completion. And I went to argue with my accountant because he was charging me not only for the raw material, but for all the value that went into all the machining that had happened to the part up to the point at which it got scrapped. I'm like, Jack, can't you just charge me for the raw material? And he says, no, those are real expenses that we incurred in that product. And we need to record that so we can understand how much value we actually destroyed on the shop floor today. By the way, my biggest scrap, and keep in mind this year's 1997, my biggest scrap ever was a $7,000 piece of material that the lathe operator on his first path took the outside diameter down too small by just a hair. Scrapped the whole damn thing, totally worthless. I asked him what happened. He said, bad hair day. I said, if you scrap 7,000 for me again and call it a bad hair day, it'll be the last bad hair day you have here. Do you think he was a little more careful going forward? Absolutely. Okay, so all inventory resources have economic value. Remember, assets, we say, are things that have economic value, or that we own, and that will bring economic value to the firm in the future. So therefore, inventory is an asset. So let's talk about the different types of inventory. First of all, there's the raw materials. I would like to hold as little raw material as possible. But there are things that come into play with determining how much raw material I'm going to hold. And we'll get into those, but just very quickly, there are things like quantity discounts. And how long does it take for me to get this stuff from the manufacturer? And how trustworthy is the transportation system that gets this stuff to me? Then we have consumables. Sometimes people get confused between raw materials and consumables. I'll give you an example from another company I worked at. We were making suspensions for trailers that go on trailer trucks. And our raw materials were sheets of metal. And then we would cut shapes out of these sheets of metal. And then we would bend the metal. And then we would weld the parts together. And so the sheet steel was the raw material. But the wire that went into the welder, do you guys know about MIG welding, where a wire comes in and that's the metal that's used to join the two pieces? That wire is considered a consumable, so because it was consumed during the process. Another one of the things that we considered to be a consumable were the jet tips on the ends of the plasma cutter heads. Remember I told you we're cutting the shapes out of this metal? We were using what was called a plasma torch. It's kind of an older relative of the laser to cut those out. But those tips wear out, and so they are consumed in the process, but they don't end up being an identifiable part of the finished product. And so those are consumables. And then we have something called work in process. You may hear people call it work in progress. The correct term is work in process, or we just call it WIP for short. WIP sounds fun and kinky, but it's really not very exciting. It's just unfinished inventory. It's raw material that we've put some value addition into, but it hasn't quite reached that finished goods stage. So what do we do? Where's our finished goods kept? Finished goods are kept in the BSG. Where do you guys have your finished goods stored?
Warehouse.
Are you sure it's the warehouse, or would it be the
Distribution.
distribution center? Which it's a combination. What you guys have, right? You have none stored at the plant. Typically, though, you're going to have some at the plant, and here's why. When that stuff comes off the line, as soon as it comes off, and they put it on that pallet, and that pallet thing gets set aside to wait for the truck, guess what? Now you've got finished goods inventory at the plant. And then any inventory to which the firm holds title. What's title? On your car, what does the certificate of title say?
Ownership.
Yeah, it talks about ownership. And there are two ways that things get shipped. There's FOB, so the other one is FOB destination. I think this one is dock. So and by the way, FOB stands for free on board. Free on board. So if your stuff is free on board from the manufacturer's dock, that means the minute it leaves their dock, it leaves their inventory and goes into yours. But if it's FOB destination, it means that it remains in their inventory until it gets to your facility, and then as soon as it reaches there, it transfers from their inventory into your inventory. Just like an accounts receivable dollar has a matching accounts payable dollar somewhere else in the world, if something moves from one inventory, if something leaves one inventory, it shows up in the other inventory. So you're not going to have some sort of no man's land where it leaves their dock and it's in nobody's inventory until it gets to yours. It's either in theirs or it's in yours. Now, why is it important to establish whose inventory it's in?
Transportation.
Transportation. Okay, what could happen during transportation?
Some damage or loss.
Yeah, did you guys see what happened with that UPS plane?
Yeah,
What happened with the UPS plane?
caught on fire, then crashed into a warehouse.
Yeah, and so this plane's taken off, and undoubtedly it's full of lots of stuff. And every single thing on there belonged to it's either in the inventory of the shipper or the recipient. Now, the left engine fell off. That makes it kind of hard to fly, especially when you've got as much fuel on board as they had. And so they end up crashing. What happened to the stuff that was in the plane? Yeah, it's all gone. Now, it's tragic. At least 12 people have died, at least. But now we have to figure out who's responsible, who's going to have to pay for that lost inventory. And the first thing we're going to do is figure out, well, wait a minute, where was it FOB? Was it free on board from at the manufacturers, or is it at the recipients? Any questions? So, why would we hold raw material inventory? Well, first of all, to handle variations in production demand. So, we're going to have various things that give us demand or a variation in our demand. And in fact, that second item, catering to cyclical season demand, that is just one of the things that induces variation. So, for example, when I had my little business where I was 3D printing things, when you got close to things like Father's Day, by the way, what's the typical Father's Day gift? Card, a tie. It's always something lame because you never know what to get your dad. And so, of course, there are people that go out to Etsy and are looking for interesting things that Dad might be interested in. And one of the things that I made was it's a clock mechanism, and you wind it up and it goes tick, 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 tick. And it's, you have to assemble it. So it keeps Dad busy for a while. And so around Father's Day, I knew I was going to have a boost in that. And so what would I do? I would stock up on my raw material, so when it came time to make those, I would have it. Because, strangely enough, you can't always get the exact 3D filament that you want. Sometimes it's out of stock. And so I would stock up. There is an entire city in China that is dedicated to making Christmas decorations. I'm not kidding. The whole damn town is based totally on making Christmas decorations. And they have this big hall where you can go and you can see all the different things that are available, and you can place your orders. When do you think those orders ship out?
November, December.
How about July? Why? Because if you air freighted that stuff, it would be astronomically expensive. So how are they going to get it over here? Yeah, cargo ship. They're going to put it in a container, and they're going to ship it. And so that means that stuff has to be ready to go by July, because it's going to take maybe 4 or 6 weeks for it to cross the ocean, and then it's going to take a while to get through customs, and then it's got to be distributed out from California, most likely. It's got to ride the train, and then it's got to get onto a truck, and then it's got to finally make it to your warehouse when people start thinking about Christmas decorations, which is now sadly sometime in September. Does that make sense? So if you looked at the inventory at these operations, I'm guessing in August, September, October, they would be basically building up their raw materials perhaps, and then they would start producing these finished goods. And so they would have, in July, they would have a bunch of finished goods and probably very little in the way of raw materials. And it's all because of this variation in demand that's driven by the seasonality. Then we've got economies of scale in procurement. So in inventory management, we have something called the ordering cost. And I want to caution you guys about ordering costs, because here's typically what people use as ordering costs. They'll take the salaries of their procurement people, they'll divide it by the number of orders, and then they'll say, well, hey, each order costs us $219. And so how am I going to reduce my ordering costs? Well, I'll just order half as often, and that'll cut my procurement costs in half. What's the fallacy to that? Remember how I told you we came up with that order cost? Unless we fire half the procurement people, have we actually reduced our ordering costs? No. So you got to be careful when people make stupid arguments like that. But I suppose there is a part of it that is incremental, and the fewer orders we have, the more we can spread our costs over, well, the less cost there is. So I can order half as often and cut my procurement cost perhaps in half, at least an incremental part of it. Then we've got expected increases, price increases, and quantity discounts. When I worked in plastics, we had these plastic salesmen that would call on us. So we took raw plastic pellets, and we took pigments, and we, through our special magic, we integrated the pigment into the pellets to make a color concentrate. And so when the price of plastic was going to go up, our salesman would call us and say, hey guys, the price of plastic is about to go up. Would you like to place an order? And even though we didn't quite need that material yet, what do you think we did?
Bought it.
Yeah, we went ahead and bought it. Now here's the interesting thing. How do salespeople get paid? Commission. So is this guy really helping or hurting himself? Yeah, he's actually hurting himself, because if he just waited until we actually needed it after the price had gone up, he would have actually gotten a bigger hit. So that says something perhaps in his world about his discount rate, his time value of money calculation. He would rather have a smaller amount of money now than more money later. But we would actually take him up on that, and as a result, there were times when our raw material inventory was higher as a result. And then there are quantity discounts. Usually, most things, the more you buy of it, the less it costs per unit. Have you guys ever looked at AliExpress, the website? So when you look out there, they've got the price for one, and then they say, but if you buy 10, they're this much a piece, which is lower, and if you buy 100, they're even lower. So that would be quantity discounts. And it works that way on certain things in industry too. So if I'm buying raw material, let's get back to the plastic example, we would buy plastic in 25 kilogram bags, which is 55 pounds. And we would, that was, because our business was small, that was basically the right size for us. Our competitor across town was many, many, many times larger than us. And they would actually buy plastic by the rail car. Who do you think had a lower cost per pound on their plastic?
Competitor.
Yeah, the competitor for sure. And so then the question becomes, well, wait a minute, why shouldn't I go ahead and buy a rail car at a time? And the answer was, number one, we didn't have anywhere to put it. And number two, a rail car of plastic might have lasted us 5 years. And we would have had that in our inventory for 5 years. And there is a cost to holding on to inventory. So we have to balance those things out. What about reducing our transit costs and transit times versus LTL? What does LTL mean?
Oh.
That's an LTL.
They said LTL.
What's LTL? I'm going to teach you guys some trucker talk today. LTL is less than load. LTL is less than load. So whenever I was shipping or buying something, well, when I was buying or selling something, there are basically, if it's less than a truckload, it's a waste for me to just put that thing on a truck and send it by itself. I could sit around and wait till enough stuff collected for that one customer and send a truck, but they're probably going to be mad at me because they've been waiting for 3 months for this stuff while this stuff was getting made. And so the answer is less than truckload shipping. And that's where I send the stuff to, and the two that I know of that are big are Saya, and then the other one is the FedEx freight people. They'll do this too. And so what I do is I send my pallet to one of these less than truckload shippers, and what they have is they've got a big old distribution center, and in each of those distribution centers, they've got these rectangles painted on the floors. And the rectangles match the size of their trailers. And what happens is, so let's say this is for Toledo. So what happens is, if I'm sending something to Toledo, I'll send it to them and they'll park it here. And then as other pallets come in, they'll park them there. And they keep building up until this entire area on the floor is covered with pallets. What do you think happens once the entire area is covered with pallets?
Ships.
Yeah, they take this stuff and they load it on a truck and they send it to Toledo. Now, it costs more per pallet than if I were to do a truckload. If I were to be able to buy a whole truckload of stuff at once, I'd buy the whole truck. And the other thing is, not only does it cost less per pallet, the time is more definite. And I'll explain to you why that is. What if I'm the first person to send something after the truck just left for Toledo? I have to wait for all this other stuff to show up before this thing ships out. Do I know exactly how many days that's going to be? No idea. It's totally dependent on what other people send and when, right? So not only am I paying more per pallet, I have more uncertainty with the time. Now, after you've played this game a while, you can kind of figure out, oh, it's usually 3 to 5 days that it sits there waiting for the other stuff to show up. But the first time you do it, you have no idea. So, if I need something in a hurry, is LTL the way to do it? No. If I'm risk losing a job, I might go ahead and buy a whole truckload of this stuff so I can have it in a timely manner, plus it reduces my shipping cost per unit. What's the downside? Now I've got all this crap in my inventory that's going to take up floor space and is going to consume its cost of capital, right? Because I had to put the money out there to get it. Then we've got what are called long lead time and high demand materials. It was the most interesting thing I ran into during my time within the plastics industry. When you're driving down the road at night and you notice those signs really shine, they reflect back at you, the pigment that makes that happen is made in a laboratory in Germany. And they only make it once per year. And it's like Hans and Franz set up this little tabletop kind of thing, and they make that stuff once per year. And so if you want that stuff, you have to have your order in for it. And so even if we didn't have impending business using that stuff, we knew that we needed to order it if we didn't have any, because it would be another year before we could get our hands on it. This stuff came in a 1-liter jug, and each liter cost $30,000. Do you think we left that stuff in the regular warehouse? No. So it's a small company, and we were at the company headquarters. Our plant was right next to the company headquarters. We actually kept that stuff in a safe in the CEO's office. And when we'd need some, one of us would trot up to the CEO's office and knock, and Rick would say, "What do you need?" And I'd say, we got an order for some highway signs, and we need the stuff. And of course, I'd look away while he puts in the combination, and then he'd hand me the bottle, and we would go carefully measure out what we need for the job. And then what do you think happened?
Back to the safe.
Right back to the safe, right? But that kind of stuff, if you didn't get your order in a timely fashion, the only option you had was to call around to your competitors and ask them. What do you think their answer is going to be?
Either no, or they'll sell it for a huge market.
Yeah, one or the other, right? Questions? So now we're going to figure out why and when and where do companies hold goods inventories. So first of all, market size. Where do you think the biggest market is for drones? Let's name the top 3 markets for drones. You guys know what drones are? Top 3 markets for drones.
So sports, like outdoor activities.
Okay, so when we're talking about markets here, let's talk about countries.
Oh, countries.
U.S.
Yeah, U.S. would be one of them. China undoubtedly is one.
Russia.
Yeah, I was going to go with Ukraine, but yeah, Russia, Ukraine, right? So if you were a drone manufacturer, would you think it would be good to hold finished goods inventory in those regions? Oh, yeah. And another thing that is impacting that is, how about tariffs? Do you think we might actually make our supply chain decisions based on tariffs? We actually see that the reason Toyota built their first plant in the United States was because of tariffs. And in fact, we still have this thing called the chicken tax because the Europeans put a tax on American chicken, and so we put a tax on European trucks. So every truck that comes in here from Europe and anywhere else in the world has a 25% tariff on it, even before Donald Trump. So what does that mean for Toyota? Do you think Toyota builds pickup trucks in Japan and sends them over here? No, that's why they have those big pickup truck plants in Texas and Indiana, is because they're avoiding that tariff. So we're going to create our supply chain based on these conditions. Here's another one for you. Let's talk about build to stock versus build to order. If I'm building something for stock, it has to be an item that I'm fairly sure that I'm going to be able to sell. Now, it's not customized to one customer's liking, but I can build it and sell it, I'm fairly sure. And so if I am building for stock, I might want to go ahead, let's say it's Apple. And with Apple, there are some basic computer things that you can buy with no customization whatsoever, and those will be kept in a warehouse in the United States. And you can get those in a day or two. But if you order one with extra memory or a weird solid state drive, where do you think it comes from? You think it's in a warehouse in the U.S.? Do you think the factory's in the U.S.? No, it's made in Shenzhen, China, and then it's shipped out through Hong Kong. And so their supply chain is different based on whether they're doing build to stock or made to order. Does that make sense? And then for marketing campaigns, if you knew you were getting ready to launch a marketing campaign. So, for instance, this time of year, people are marketing all this pumpkin spice stuff. Do you think it would make sense that they would increase their finished goods inventory of this pumpkin spice stuff immediately before putting those promotions out? Absolutely. Then we have local taxes and other government rules. Here's a good one for you. If you buy wine or liquor online and you live in New Jersey, New Jersey state law says that wine or liquor must be shipped from a warehouse in New Jersey. However, the states that surround New Jersey don't have laws like that. So if you were running an online wine and liquor distributor or sales place, where would you put your warehouse?
New Jersey.
New Jersey. Does anyone actually want to go to New Jersey? No. It's expensive, but it's cheaper than having, because you're going to have one there anyway if you're going to sell booze in New Jersey. By the way, do you think people in New Jersey drink? Oh yeah, I would drink too if I lived in New Jersey, right? Okay. So those are the kinds of things that are going to also make us move where we have our finished goods. And then we have production lead times. If I've got something that I can make quite quickly, does it make a lot of sense to hold an inventory? No. If I've got something, even if I can't make it quickly, if it's kind of a made-to-order thing and my customer's willing to wait, does it make sense to hold a finished goods inventory? No. I'll give you an example. Every time I order a new car, I always I custom order it, so it's exactly what I want. How long do you think I have to wait?
6 months.
Yeah, it's pushing 6 months, right? But I'm willing to wait. So it doesn't make sense for the automakers to make a bunch of different cars that match all the variations that are possible and have those in finished goods if people are willing to wait in spite of the long production lead time. So if we've got a customer that's willing to wait or we've got a low production lead time, then holding that finished good doesn't necessarily make sense. But if we've got something that takes a long time to make that customers are going to demand now, then it makes sense to carry finished goods. So example, when I worked at the nuclear plant, I think we've talked about the spare parts situation there. Those parts took months to make, and yet when we needed it now. And so it made all the sense in the world for our suppliers to have those finished goods on their shelves. And by the way, did it make sense for us to have it on our shelf or for them to have it on their shelves? Well, it made sense for them to have it on their shelves because guess what? We were not the only nuclear power plant in the world. There were some standardized designs. We had a Babcock and Wilcox reactor for Unit 1, and we had a combustion engineering reactor for Unit 2. But they were the same kinds of reactors that were at other nuclear plants, like 3 Mile Island actually had one of the same things that we had. And so it makes sense for that finished goods inventory to be sitting there at the supplier because they didn't know where it was going to be needed, but they would have it when the time came. Does that make sense? Then there are speculative gains. What if I could go out and buy stuff because I think the value of it is going to go up? That's purely gambling. Purely gambling. Do I advise you to ever purely gamble? Absolutely not. Now, I can tell you though, there is a company here in town that does this and they actually do quite good at it. So, are you guys familiar with SRC? Springfield Remanufacturing Company or something like that. So what they do is they take engines and transmissions that are worn out and they strip them down and they rebuild them. They refurbish parts where necessary, they replace parts where necessary, and when it's done, the thing is as good as new and they slap a warranty on it and they sell it. The way that business works is that when your engine or transmission wears out, you're supposed to bring it into when you buy the new transmission, and so when they sell you the new transmission, they charge you what's called a core charge. And when you return your old transmission, then they refund that core charge. Well, a lot of farmers didn't realize how much, and farmers were the main customers, didn't realize how much the core charge was and how much they would get if they took that thing back. And so these transmissions and engines were actually winding up in junkyards. And so now there's a demand for these remanufactured engines, but they didn't have enough of the engines and transmissions that were being turned in by the farmers. And so they started to scour junkyards. And they actually figured out that they could buy the transmissions cheaper from junkyards than they could from the transmission suppliers that were returning these things in on core charges. And so they came up with a whole group of people who were just responsible for doing nothing all day but calling around to junkyards in these agricultural areas looking for these particular models of engines and transmissions. But then they figured out something else. Well, hey, there's also all sorts of other interesting stuff in these junkyards. And they started by thinking, well, wait a minute, I think aluminum, the value of scrap aluminum is going to go up, so I'm going to start hoarding scrap aluminum. It's purely speculative. Why? Because there's not an actual demand for this stuff right now other than at regular market price, but they're assuming that that value is going to go up. Strangely enough, this division of SRC is quite profitable. So apparently, they're better gamblers than I am. Where are they getting their information about what's going to happen to the price of aluminum? I have no idea. I would love to sit down with these people and see if there's any sort of scientific basis for what they're doing. And then there's the idea of avoiding costs. First of all, the ordering cost. The less frequently I order stuff, the lower my ordering costs. And so I might want to have my finished goods where I could send out bigger groups. And then, of course, there's stock out costs. What's a stock out cost? First of all, what's a stock out?
You run out of inventory, you can't supply your customers.
Yeah, when you run out of inventory, your customer's there and wants to buy something and you can't sell it to them. And so let's talk about what stock out costs are. Worst case scenario, you don't have it. What does your customer do?
Buy from someone else.
Yeah, they go to someone else. Now, one of the things that when I worked at the grocery store, we would have 2 big truckloads of milk come twice a week. And so we would try to forecast how much milk we were going to sell. But if we hit a situation where we sold more milk than we intended, we would end up getting something called a hot shot. And a hot shot is where they send a smaller truck, specially just to you, to deliver this milk. What do you think our ordering cost was for a hot shot gallon of milk versus for a regular gallon of milk? Yeah, it's going to cost more. And so that incremental cost was a stock out cost for us, or as the cost of avoiding a stock out. And so that's another reason that you would keep finished goods inventory. So far, the things that I've told you, you're like, well, wait a minute, maybe we should just carry a lot of inventory and we can avoid all these problems. Well, too much of an inventory can actually be a sign of a problem too. So first of all, supplier inefficiency and unreliability. We used to, and it may still use these, I don't know, but it was a piston rod in the valve that my people manufactured. And it was about this long, it was about this big around. It was made from Inconel 718, which is a jet engine type material. And then it had a spray weld on it and the ends were threaded. There was all sorts of stuff that went into it. And when you finished with that, you had to be able to roll it across the tabletop. If it came in with a bend, it wouldn't roll on the tabletop. That was our test to see if it was suitable for our purposes. We used to try to make that in-house, but we had a high scrap rate. Well, we had a local machine shop that was very interested in giving that a try. And I was probably using 2 of those. Let's see, I was doing 30 valves a month, so I was using maybe 10 of those a week. My first order, and by the way, I kept manufacturing them in-house, but I also gave these people an order for 10 of those. And what do you think happened when we got the first order? When we rolled the first 10 across the tabletop, only 2 of them passed the test. And so next time when I place my order, if I want to order enough to make sure that I get my 10 that I need, how many am I actually going to order? Yeah, I'm going to order 50. And so as a result, I end up with all this part inventory. Now, I go through and test them and I end up rejecting them and sending them back. But the very fact that we were having to make those big orders said something about that supplier. Also, what if your supplier just couldn't be relied upon to actually deliver stuff in a timely manner? then you might have extra stuff on hand just because you were never sure how long it was going to take to get stuff from them. And so if you see that you're carrying a lot of inventory from your suppliers, it means you need to start looking at your suppliers. You may be able to find a better supplier. You may be able to work with your supplier to help them solve some of their problems. By the way, a lot of times people say, well, wait a minute, it's not my responsibility to help my supplier solve a problem. Is it in your best interest to do so? Yeah, even if it benefits other people, right? I want to know when I call these people that 1 week or 2 weeks from now, whenever it is, I'm going to get a product from them that is on time, it's the correct quantity, and it's the proper quality. And then we have bad quality. And this is within our own manufacturing operation. I went and toured the Honda plant where they make the Civics. It's up in Liberty, Ohio. Liberty or Maryville? It's up in Ohio, that part of where no one else lives. There's this big Ohio or Honda plant. And I had been educated in engineering school about how great Japanese quality was. And so I was expecting that there would be very little in the way of rejects in their process. But I was totally amazed to learn that only like 68% of the cars rolling off the line at any given time were acceptable. So what does that mean is going to happen to the rest of those? They had massive indoor parking lots where these cars, and they all had a tag on them of what needed fixed before they could be shipped. Those cars are sitting in your inventory the entire time until you get them fixed and shipped out. And so that could be another reason that your inventory is inflated because you've got all these cars awaiting rework. By the way, one of the problems that they ran into, the most common one, was that the hood or the trunk lid didn't fit. And you might think that there would be some highly scientific way that they would then adjust this to make it fit. It was a big guy, probably about your size, maybe a little bigger, and he would stand there and he would and then he would gently close it, and if it closed, it was good to go. But in the meantime, it was in their inventory. We also see that we'll have to increase production in our inventory due to rejects. So one of the things that's really interesting when a new iPhone comes out and it's got a new screen on it, Apple will actually order twice as many screens as they need because they know the yield on a new screen is only about 50%. So they order twice as much. And it's always fun to watch because these analysts will track the number of screens that Apple orders and assume that iPhone sales track 1-to-1 with the screens. But what they fail to recognize is that iPhone sales aren't falling as fast as they think they are. It's that the yield at the suppliers is getting better, better, and better as they produce it more. Does it make sense that as you do something more, you get better at it? Yeah, and by the time they're about ready to switch out the iPhone model, the yield's up to around 100%. And so that can be a reason for increased production and inventory. And then we've got production delays. If I've got delays anywhere along the line, WIP will stack up. We've already talked about what WIP is. Here's the interesting thing. I can walk into any factory and I can tell them exactly where the problem is because it's the machine where all the work is stacked up. That's the problem. Where do you think they should focus their energies? That machine. You need to clear up that bottleneck. And so you can have a breakdown. I had a machine that broke down a lot. And as a result, it would always have inventory stacked up on it. So what should I do about that? Well, one thing you can do is buy another machine. So if this one's not running, maybe at least this one will. The bad design. I just watched a thing last night about the Sherman tank. You guys know about Sherman tanks? Most common American tank in World War II. We were cranking them out by the dozen. But at the beginning of the war, we could only make 300 per year or something like that. And each tank had 7,000 welds and was basically built by hand. The whole was built as one piece. And so they had welders having to climb into these tiny spaces and do all the welding. I don't know if you guys have ever done welding, but it's basically a 3-step process. You have to do the welding, and you have to chip the slag, and then you have to wire brush this stuff before it can be painted, otherwise it's going to rust. And so they had these skilled welders doing all this stuff. And then when the war started, they said, we're going to lose before we even start because we can't produce enough of these Sherman tanks. And so Franklin Roosevelt, the president, calls in the guy that's in charge of GM at the time, a guy named Knudsen. And he brings in all the great automotive thinkers of the day, and they take the Sherman tank design and they revamp it. Instead of the whole being made out of one piece, now it's 6 pieces. So basically a bottom, a top, and the 4 sides. And they reduced the number of welds from 7,000 down to 2,000. Plus, they changed the layout such that the experienced welders are not chipping slag anymore. I can bring someone off the street and in 5 days teach them the appropriate method for chipping slag and wire brushing. It's going to take me 2 years to train a skilled welder, right? So what I want to do is make sure that the skilled welders are only doing the welding work, and that I can then break down those other tasks where unskilled people can do other things. And so that basically was the changing of the plant layout to do that. Let's see. Lengthy process times. When I worked in Duncan, Oklahoma, some of the parts that we used in our pumps had to be carburized. Carburizing is a physical process where you put these steel parts inside a furnace and you flood them with a carbon-rich gas that's derived from natural gas, and the carbon atoms diffuse into the steel to create a hard surface. It's very wear resistant. But no matter what I did, that process was going to take 24 hours because basically it is a physical, natural process. You can't speed it up. And so as a result of that lengthy process time, I knew that I had to keep enough of those parts on hand that I could consume while the next set of parts was still in that lengthy process. Questions? So what are the dangers of having too much inventory? Well, first of all, it ties up our working capital. It takes money to put things on the shelf. And then we have spoilage. Products can go out of date. I'll give you a real easy example here. How long is a loaf of bread good for?
Depends on, but.
It depends.
couple weeks.
Yeah, for American bread, it's a couple of weeks. So I went to China, and my wife and I go to the grocery store, and I'm like, what's up with these tiny ass loaves of bread? They were maybe a third the size of ours. I'm like, what the hell's that? So I buy one, and we bring it home, and we're making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches because we're Americans. And within 3 days, mold had started growing on the bread. Why weren't they selling bigger loaves? Because it wasn't going to be good for that long. If you've got a product that goes bad, you have to take that into account. You don't want to make a bunch of bread in advance because it might go bad. Now you may think this is only for foods and things like that, but other things go bad also. What about drugs? When you pick up a box of antihistamines at the grocery store, what's always on the box?
Expiration.
Yeah, an expiration date. And let's think about, this is one that's even further from people's minds. Those O-rings, rubber O-rings that are used in hydraulic systems and things like that, those things have a freshness date. They actually go bad. And once they pass that date, you've got to toss them. Are you guys familiar with hard hats that are made out of plastic? Did you know those things have an expiration date? I didn't either until I got my first one and I looked at it and I'm like, oh damn, I better wear the hell out of this because it's going to expire in a year and a half. So, should you build up a massive inventory of hard hats in anticipation? No, because they could go bad. And then we also have products corroding. We used to have the problem with our carbon steel parts that a customer would put in an order. And they would say, we want this part, and my planner, a guy named Bill, would get on the computer. He's like, oh yeah, we got 2 of those on the shelf. No problem, we'll get that sent out to you today. We'd send a warehouse hand out, and he would come back, and if the part was small enough, he was holding it in his hands. He says, I got some bad news. I'm like, oh crap, what's up? He's like, well, you know that 78 double lot whatever that you sent me for? I'm like, yeah. He says, it's rusted. Now at this point, what do I have to do? I have to get my inspectors to look at it to see if it can be salvaged. If it can be salvaged, I have to have my people who take care of such things rework the part. And then I have to have it re-inspected. And then I can ship it out. And so would I want to put a bunch of those on the shelf? Probably not. Then we have to worry about theft. Do you remember that $30,000 jar of stuff I told you about? Do you remember where I told you we kept it?
Safe.
In the safe. Now, here's the bad thing. Everyone in the plant knew that thing was worth $30,000. Stupid people will steal something because they know it's worth $30,000. But stupid people also don't think more than one step down the line. What's going to happen when that person tries to turn around and sell that? Yeah, it's going to get flagged, or they don't even know where to sell it, right? You take it down to a pawn shop. Look, yeah, it's worth $30,000. What will you give me? They're not going to buy it, right? Do you think when the stupid person figures out that they can't flip it, that they'll bring it back? No. And so you got to keep valuable stuff locked up, even if there's really no immediate aftermarket for it, because people will steal it. We had cutting tools, little triangles of carbide, tungsten carbide. And they went for $20 or $30 a piece. And their scrap value was about $1 a piece. And so we would save up the worn out, and then we would sell it to a scrap dealer who would buy it. Well, one of the guys figured out that that stuff was worthwhile, so he started going around at night and emptying all the buckets where we threw the worn out carbide cutting tools. And he was selling it himself. And we didn't realize what was going on until he started breaking into the tool crib and stealing the new cutting tools. Keep in mind, these things are costing us $20 to $30 a piece. He's selling them for $1 a piece on the outside, brand new, never used. And then how do we find out? When the time comes, when we got a job we've got to do and we got to get the tool, they're not there. And so when you check the inventory, you figure out, oh crap, we're 10 short of that, and we're 20 short of that. And so those are the things you have to worry about, people stealing. What do you think if you worked at an athletic shoe warehouse? I'd be searching everybody every day, right? Because people will, by the way, you think they're going to steal just their own size? No, they're going to, because they could turn around and sell it on eBay or Amazon. Do you think a lot of the stuff that you buy on eBay and Amazon is stolen? Absolutely. And then we have to worry about obsolescence. An obsolete thing is perfectly functional, but it is out of date. For example, when I worked for Halliburton, we used to make this pump called the T10. And the last user on the planet of T10 was in Vietnam. And at the time, we did not have good relations with Vietnam. We did not have trade relations with Vietnam. We had parts on the shelf for this pump. We hadn't had trade relations with Vietnam since 1975. That crap had been on the shelf for about 20 years. No one else wanted it. It was obsolete. So that's another reason we don't want to put too much on the shelf. A better example would be iPhone 17. Right now, iPhone 17 is all the rage. Should Apple make several million of them and put them on the shelf for next year? No, why not? iPhone 18 is going to come out, right? And in fact, the fact that you could still buy a new iPhone 14 in the box says that somewhere along the way, someone built up too much inventory. And now the reason you're able to get it cheap, because it's obsolete. Any questions? Okay, next time we will pick up here and continue.